I'm working on a, oh, okay, got it.
Sorry about that.
You're fine. That was working on a liquid biopsy. So essentially a blood draw that you could maybe do cancer detection earlier than what some of our current diagnostics are at. And as I kind of outgrew that job, I was looking to get some experience in what does a like multi-leveled organization look like? What's it look like when you're not strapped for money? And that's the, not the rate limiting factor. And so was able to jump into Lilly as a contractor and then eventually switched into a full-time role for the past 6 years. And I have kind of jumped between discovery, so very much your bench science that you would see in any master's or PhD program, over to now kind of the clinical side of things, where I'm interacting with the trial teams and working with kind of the testing and things that go into that into each trial so that we can ultimately do FDA and EMA submission.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's a lot of planning and organizing. I'll get into the depth of that, but are you originally from Indiana? Are you from here originally?
The Midwest. I'm Indiana adjacent. So I was born and raised up in the western suburbs of Chicago. So kind of, and obviously have stuck around, migrated to Purdue, and then I'm currently in Indianapolis and have been for the last, 6 or 7 years.
So was it that you went to seek out a job locally in the field that you were in, or is there something else that's keeping you in Indiana?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a mixed question. I am married, and my husband's family is from south of here by about 2.5 hours. And then my immediate family is north of here by about 2.5 hours. So for us, it made sense to stay local. And it just, the proximity of both Purdue and then having Indianapolis, which has, they also have a Roche Diagnostics, and then there's Cook Biomedical. It just made sense to stay. And now with the kind of whole work from home movement, now obviously I'm not going to be taking my pipettes home, but if you do go into more of that clinical role, or you're into more data analysis, the world is kind of your oyster right now, because I could easily work for a company in Japan, or, I could work for somewhere in Europe, but I can do it from the comfort of my home. And since that works best for our family, that's where we've decided to stay.
That's great. That's and so awesome to see you also adapt and adjust to the changing times. Alle, I'm very intrigued by this world of data that you're talking about, and this clinical labs manager role that you have. Tell us a little bit more about that. What is it that you do on a day-to-day basis? Are you talking to clinicians, helping them plan their trials, or are you helping retrieve data, collect data? What is it that you actually do? What's your position?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say I'm very autonomous within a subset of a team. I'm part of the core team at the sponsor side. So we generate the protocol, we have the investigational product or device, and I'm part of that core implementation team, with my focus specifically being lab testing and imaging. And so what I help do, I can do really boring things like work on budgets and contracts for vendors, or I can do really cool stuff like meeting with a bunch of our practitioners in our medical board and deciding what is the most necessary tests to help evaluate if this drug is working in a pediatric population, or in an elderly population with certain levels of dementia, or in a cancer patient that has refractory, has been refractory for every other treatment they've had. And a little bit of everything in between. I would say I'm heavily operational, because then once we decide on that plan, then it's my job to get that implemented, be that working with another third party to source specialty tubes. Like one good example is actually, I have a pediatric trial for COVID, and because they're peds, you don't want to take too much blood, but you do want to make sure you're monitoring their safety. So we've been piloting these really cool micro samplers and are kind of doing a comparator of analysis for our PK studies with a normal whole blood tube to see, do these work in the same way? I mean, we're talking like 10, 20 microliters per draw. Like how cool would that be? And they can be stored ambiently, so you don't even need to worry about freezing. I mean, the implications for that are huge and could be really beneficial. And so helping the PK scientists, helping them understand, like, what is this sample that we're taking, and, what kind of, reagents might it be in, and, how would the patient's, positioning of their hand, or maybe what they've been doing could change the analysis of that. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I've only been in this role for about 1.5 years, and they say it takes about 2 years to really know what you're doing. So I guess I'm still figuring it out. Yeah.
I think we're all still just figuring it out as we go along, don't you? Like, everybody seems to be on this boat where I think I'll try that. Let's see if that works. No, but it sounds like you have, as you said, the word is perfect, autonomy. You have a lot of freedom to pick and choose. Do you pick the disease, or is the disease and the target, is that kind of selected for you, and then you can creatively think within those limits?
So it's at my level, it's kind of decided for me. Or I guess I shouldn't say just in this area, but even when I was still at the bench as a discovery scientist, the way at least at Lilly is broken up, I won't speak for all pharmas, is broken up by kind of disease category. So when you would apply for a job internally or externally, it would state like, this is a position that's focusing on oncology. This is a position focusing in diabetes. So you could get, you can work your way through that direction. Now, if you really wanted to work on, soft tissue sarcomas versus, maybe some skin cancers, you may not have that level of flexibility when you first get in the door. But if you get in and you start to kind of establish your grounds of like, hey, I'm a competent scientist, and that's when you can really start working with your boss or your mentor to help them kind of give you projects to expand your horizon and also keep you interested in what you're doing. That's certainly something that I've done as I've been at Lilly, and is why I keep jumping around, because I want to learn more, not just stay where I'm at.
And so give us a little bit of a tip for that, because it's obviously given you some sort of success, right? In moving and progressing, advancing. What defines that success? And how do you get the courage to do a little bit of what you're doing? Because it sounds like you're just sometimes sticking your head up and looking around and saying, hey, what else is up there for me?
Yeah, so I think two of the biggest things, and I'll kind of wrap some of the best advice I've been given, which kind of gave me the boot out the door a little bit. I have a mentor at currently where I work, and his advice when I was kind of like, oh, I'm really stressed out, and I feel kind of stuck, and I don't know where to go. He was like, the only constant is change. And it's very simple, but it did help kind of just like, I'm never going to find the perfect spot, and so I either have to get comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable all the time, or I can kind of be the driver of, okay, it's time I want to drive the change, and I get to choose where I'm going. So that has been just a good motto to keep in mind when things are going a little bonkers. But then in terms of like, how did I kind of get that idea and to have this kind of movement around? For me, I didn't want to get stuck being a one-trick pony. I love the bench, and one thing that's so great about it is that you may not have 2 days that are ever the same. But I didn't want to become, 45, 50, still young, and not have known where that drug's going beyond my benchtop. I wanted to understand more about the patient impact, more that translational side. And so that was the driver for me to move from the bench into the clinic where I am now. But actually my longer term goal down the road is to move into more of a hybrid space where I'm helping build diagnostics. So I know I need both of those sections. I need to be able to say, yeah, I've been at the bench, done the blood, sweat, and tears, but I also need to say, logistically, trials are much crazier than what we think they are, and so I need to be able to come and bring both so that I can deliver to the patient. So I kind of used like a really long-term goal, and then took a look at internal postings in my own company, and then I just started like cold emailing some of the hiring managers and was like, "Tell me more about this job. What is it you look for when you're hiring someone, and what experience do I need to get if this job sounds interesting to me?" And then I've kind of started weaving in different projects to start learning that. So we'll see if that's where I end up.
But I think that's great. I mean, being able to have that as a conduit, right? To ask, what is it that you need? If we are on the outside and we're looking to find a job at Lilly, how do we find those hiring managers? How do we find the right person to talk to? Are they typically listed on the job posting?
Great question. I won't speak for all multi-layer organizations, but I would say out on a limb, this is probably how most of them are. The HR department runs the job postings. And so you may see a person listed on there, especially if you're doing it through like LinkedIn. But that's not going to ultimately be the person that hires you. It's not atypical. When I would be in the lab, we hired a person that was like in my same lab group to get 300 or 400 applicants for an external spot. And so there's something to be said for, yes, you hone the CV and the resume as best as you can, but do just a little extra, like, okay, so if you see the hiring name for the HR person, if you have LinkedIn, go and friend that recruiter. Now, if you personally message them, they're probably not going to talk to you, but you can at least do that. So you're starting to see them come in, start liking some of their posts. Come to things like this. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Now, I don't have any special privilege to let you get in, but you can at least start networking within and learning about it. Especially for those that are PhDs out there, there are actually I don't want to say ample, a lot of opportunities to do postdocs in industry. You're just not going to find them maybe at a conference advertising. So go ahead, look on our websites, follow us on LinkedIn. I know we are, within the last week, I saw an advertisement for an immunology postdoc that we're looking for. And that would be a hybrid experience for you of getting to see, you still do some bench work, but you'd also be able to go to conferences and you'd be publishing and networking with other institutions. And so that's, I think, a great way to test the waters, especially if you don't want to just like cold call into the industry, to kind of see, get your feet wet, do it for 2 years and see if that's the right fit for you.
And Alle, I think that's very reasonable and actually very good advice, right? The more we network, the more people that we connect with, the more people that we know, the more people that can hear about us or that we hear about them and their friends. I mean, it's networking, networking, networking. This is what it's all about. It's a lot about talking to people and maybe getting a little bit of that courage, because I do feel that energy that you have because you're passionate about what you do. You're like, okay, well, who can I go talk to, and not having any inhibitions about going to talk and ask the questions that you need to ask, so that you create meaningful connections with your network. Um, what what does define success in industry? Meaning, you know, we're talking about hiring and different positions and different opportunities that you see from within the company. If you are a successful industry scientist, would they promote you before they would go hire somebody new from the street, somebody new that is, applying through LinkedIn? Is that still something? Because I know if I'm a hiring manager and I know of somebody that I've supervised or observed their training to do the particular tasks that we need to do in this project, I can trust my training, I can trust my processes. Somebody that comes off the street might be 10 times better. I just don't know if they're crazy or not. I don't know if they're even going to know what this person knows or not. So there's a lot of that balance and questions that we have as academics thinking, well, they probably would hire internally or promote internally before they hire externally.
Yeah, so I will say, and I don't know that this is a downside or if it's just a fact of industry, is at the end, there's always a bottom line, right? And so one interesting tip maybe to keep in your back pocket as you job search is if you're around, so industries run in quarters, right? So its first quarter is, January through March, and second, third, fourth. A lot of times that's when they're doing their large scale budget reviews. And so when things shift, like if you see a ton of job openings all of a sudden disappear, it's usually because they're shifting headcount. And that could be just one tip to keep in mind is, if a job posting is up in the middle of a quarter, it's probably going to stay there for a couple weeks at least until the next quarter comes and then everybody gets crazy. So just thinking about that as you were talking. But to kind of answer your question about promoting within versus external, I have seen pretty evenly both. I certainly think there's an opportunity to promote from within if somebody is, reaching that level, but they're also not ignorant enough to think that just because you've been there 5, 10, 15 years, that you're going to be able to produce a task that you have no clue what you're doing in, especially in the science realm, as things have been changing so rapidly with the immunology area and even Alzheimer's to an extent. We're looking for people that are real experts in kind of that cutting edge technology. You can train, get an old dog, get them to do new tricks, but there's something to be said when you can bring in somebody who's an expert at, multi-level flow and next gen sequencing, and I've watched some of those new PhDs or MS students come in and kind of like bring the lab along with them. And then at the same time, if they can train some of us that are a little older, then that's the opportunity maybe for promotion, or I can take that information and bring it to the next lab that I go to and kind of bring us up as a whole. So I've certainly seen both options. It's really dependent on what the project is, because you will need some of that historical expertise, but you also need to make sure you're staying on top of what is the newest science telling us, and what's the newest thinking.
That's the and does that always happen? Meaning, that you have a progressive atmosphere, always trying to stay on top of the technology, always trying to know what's the latest, greatest. There is a misconception, right? That if you go into industry and you become good at one particular task, that you're going to stay in that task forever because you're the best at that task. But does it change? I mean, in our scientific environment and biology and everything you're talking about, things are changing so rapidly all the time that we have no hope of staying in one channel.
No, that's a great question. There's kind of two answers, although I'm pretty sure the stigma of staying in the same area forever is a dying breed. There's kind of this new evolution of like, you always have to be on top of it. Sometimes a little too on top of it. So for example, when I was at the bench, it was not uncommon for me to work on some Alzheimer's work, and then also switch over to like colitis, and need to understand both of those biologies. And in the case that perhaps the project failed, I might get scrapped and have to go into something in immune oncology, depending on what I'm working on. Now that's much more of the like kind of academic thinking, not so much like, oh, what am I doing task-wise? That might remain kind of the same. But that's where I think industry, at least the industry I've experienced, gives you some options. I could stay, if I love that and I like that style, I could stay there for 25 years and kind of hop around into different, therapeutic areas if I wanted to. That's great. You have that ability and get promoted. But that wasn't where I wanted to head. And so there are opportunities. I mean, I have never changed my location. I still live in the same spot. I still drive and park in the same area, but I'm doing a wildly different job with wildly different techniques. And that was just, 3 or 4 years ago. And learning new tasks that I'm going to be able to take into the next area. Another great example, if you don't mind, this would be a great bench to application one that I had, and it's kind of like my pride and joy. So we had been talking about needing to kind of streamline some really monotonous processes in the lab. Like, we were trying to isolate some specific cells, and it just takes forever, very boring stuff where you're spinning and then you're washing and, just like all this stuff where you're like, okay, this could take forever. But really, like we have our brains and that's what we want to use. And so we pitched an idea to our engineering team of like, here's the protocol, here's what we need to have done. Could you build an instrument like a robot that could do this? And we did. And it just came in like 2 weeks ago. And it's this kind of monstrous machine, but it's going to go, I don't have to touch any of those cells anymore. I basically put in an order and I say, I need T cells isolated and I need this many per mil or whatever it is. And I need them by 5 p.m. And now this machine can actually like run that entire process. And I got to be part of that whole group, the engineering, even the finance team, like making a business case for why this would be something. And you're telling people who don't even know what a T cell is. So like there is an opportunity to kind of get your fingers in where you want to go, if that's what you want to do. If you like the bench, good, stay at the bench like that. You can do that too.
I love that
Yeah.
flexibility, and I love that you were able to channel other areas of creativity because you knew what the constraints were at the bench. They trusted your, solutions to make a new robot, as you said, and maybe because that might have business legs on its own beyond Lilly's core business, right? Very cool. Very, very neat. What do you know now that you didn't know when you were in academia? What would you say to us that are still here?
Sure. I think I didn't realize that there were the amount of opportunities that there are. You just kind of building off your last point about like, I thought I would get stuck in the same spot and I would never kind of move. I would just be pipetting like this for the rest of my life. And that just isn't true. And it's part of that is one, where do you try and wiggle around? But a lot of it's too is selling my abilities. I think all of us as scientists, especially if you're in the like lab-based sciences, we underestimate how good our project management skills are. And you don't have to go into a project management position for that to be a good thing. And so selling that side of you in your interviews of like, yeah, I can juggle lots of different assays at the same time and, and do a poster and, like, especially like people just they underestimate that side of the scientists completely. And so I learned that I needed to sell myself a little bit more than I was giving myself credit for. And then I also learned that I wasn't going to be stuck at the bench if that's not what I wanted to do.
Totally.
Yeah.
Selling yourself more. But again, I come back to this confidence thing because once you start realizing that, oh, I can do this, oh, I can do this, oh, I've done that, I've done this. The thing is that we don't necessarily always reflect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're constantly journaling, what did I do? What did I do today? what did I do this week? What did I do this month? Unless we're constantly doing that and we go back and we read, we put ourselves down, don't we? We're like, oh, that's just normal to handle that many cells and then put the poster together while you're working on your manuscript and you're having a meeting about what's going on in the safety area of the lab or this or that, what new equipment we should buy. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that we do juggle, and I love that you are giving us this picture of, yeah, you should be more confident in what your abilities are and be able to sell them more to the different people that you work with. What's the best of advice you've gotten so far?
I'm still going to harken back to the only constant is change, especially in industry. I will say that's one thing I've never totally gotten used to, but just things like they're constantly rearranging who the upper management is. And it's not so much that it impacts me all the time, but sometimes you're like, what are they even doing up there?
Musical chairs.
Or even just, changing their minds. Like I might work on this project for 6 months or something. And then they're like, you know what, we're going to table that for another 6 months. And we'll come back and you're just like, oh. And you just have to kind of remember, you don't have privy to every piece of decision that's made, but you do just have to remember, this is the norm. So you're very change adverse. Maybe industry is not the best spot for you.
Yeah, totally. So with that in mind, what is it that you miss most about academia or working in academia?
Yeah, I do miss the ability to more control what it is exactly that I'm working on. So, kind of like I said earlier, I could be doing similar assays, or similar kinds of instrumentation in data analysis, but what's going to keep me going is if it's a project that I personally feel vested in. I mean, all the diseases I work on are bad, and they have a personal tug, but there's certain ones that just really connect with. So like for an example, the very first position I got at Lilly worked in pediatric oncology, and that was like so incredibly rewarding. But that is not an area that we would stay in forever because we just can't. Or that's just not where the positions are at. There are organizational changes, and it would make more sense for me to jump over to another group for job security, and they might be working on something different. And so that's probably my biggest frustration, or one thing I miss the most, is that there is a real nice thing in academia where you go, you know what, I really love this area and I'm just going to hone in on this, and as long as I can get grants for it, I'm good to go, right? So that's definitely the one thing I miss, but I don't miss it enough to come back yet.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Because I would ask, what would you miss about working in industry if you were back in academia? I'm sure you've thought a little bit about that too.
I have. I would miss not worrying about money. And I know that sounds really crazy, but I don't know how many of you on the phone have had to fill pipette tip boxes and autoclave them yourselves, or, kind of grovel at the feet of somebody that's doing a grant. And there's something about that just kind of irritates me, because I feel like the science should be the driver, right? Like our rate limiting factor shouldn't be if we have enough autoclave tips, So, I love that kind of freedom in industry. Like if I have an idea for this kind of extravagant experiment, I more or less have the ability to order it. Which maybe is excessive to some people, but there's something really cool to be said about having an idea and like kind of getting to fulfill that dream of that.
And
that
how
idea.
many people do you need to convince to order it to get that experiment done?
If it's for the actual project, we have, I won't say how much money we have to spend on a daily basis, but it's 4 to 5 figures we can order per day.
Okay. And And so that gives you a lot of sense of, wow, I can really, the sky's the limit of what I
Mhm,
can do on a
mhm,
daily basis.
mhm,
I appreciate that,
mhm,
because we do struggle many times for smaller amounts of dollars to do
mhm.
experiments, and we have to have them planned out. We have to have them planned out throughout the year for 5 years, and what we're going to do and what do we expect to find and this and that. Do you think you can take greater risks in industry because you have some of that freedom? Uh, Greater risks in terms of, you know, a high risk, high reward type experiments, right?
Definitely. I would say high risk, high reward is a very good way to put it, because you're usually, if you're spending that quantity, it's for one of two reasons. The reward would be really high, but the science is very unproven, or we already know the science is proven and it's going to be a smashing hit. And so let's throw all our resources at it. And now I will say, the larger your spend goes, right? Like kind of that robot that I had talked about, that took some convincing. I mean, that's much more in the 6-7 figure range. So obviously I don't have any power to do that. But when it came to just, things like, hey, I need to get some reagents in order to run this mass spec sample, or, you know what, I need to run, 200 plates and I need it to go through this, machine to do it, like ordering the plates and ordering the chemicals, that's not the rate limiting factor. So there is some opportunity to kind of, go above and beyond, but there's certainly also, there is some convincing that needs to be done occasionally. Yes.
And that's good because, you're kept accountable, right? Ali, tell me something about presentations. Are you made to present a lot? Like, you ordered an experiment, you did the experiment, and it didn't work out. Um, I would assume that you are made to report back on the results and so on and explain what happened or what your interpretation is of what happened. Are you made to make presentations? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say in the more bench area, it's still formulated very similarly. Now, again, I'm only speaking from my experience where I've been, but it's still formulated similarly to how academia is. You have essentially a PI, and you have a large shared lab space, but you'll have your own bench, and there will be a whole group of you working on a couple projects, and you might share some of the reagents and such. And then you would have, depending on kind of how your current boss is, you might do monthly or you might do weekly meetings where you would just kind of do some rough show of like, hey, here's where my data's at, and I don't know, this isn't working. What do you guys think? So kind of like putting your heads together. And then if there is a reason for you to go and maybe you need a larger group of, heads to come together, or you found out something really neat that you think could benefit the larger group, you might present it kind of what's called like a mini town hall. And that could consist of like 50 to 100 people. And you might do a more formal presentation. That isn't necessarily a requirement, but it certainly doesn't hurt when it comes to wanting to go up for promotion for the same reason you would go, oh, I remember who that is. Like, yeah, that, they had that they figured out that neat trick on, the blah, blah, blah microscope, And then there is also the opportunity to still go to conferences. And you can certainly, obviously you have to go through like the legal department to make sure what you're saying isn't like confidential, but there is still the opportunity to do poster or oral presentation at pretty much any of the current symposiums that are around right now. So there's that option. And then lastly, like in my current role, which is not bench-based, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily doing presentations, but I do have to state my part in our weekly team huddles. And so for each protocol that I'm on, I'm responsible for bringing the updates for my area on our once weekly meeting. And so it's not formal, I'm not showing charts or anything too fancy, but I do have to be there and speak my piece. But I certainly could say two things and then shuttle to the back if I was really uncomfortable with it as well.
So you can be yourself, but do you feel that having good presentation skills would help you, or do help you, having again that confidence to speak in public is helpful?
Yes, definitely. Actually, I would say that's one of the best soft skills I took away from Purdue. We had some pretty intense presentation courses, and I would say those have been some of the most beneficial things that I've learned. Obviously, the science was very good as well, but I can take that information with me anywhere. And it just, when you can kind of direct a room, as even if you just seem organized, people inherently start to trust you more, or they at least want to trust that if you have an idea, well, they're organized, they might actually get it done. So yes, I would say presentation skills are never going to hurt. I will say if you interview for like a discovery role, so when you're doing that early research, they do, part of the interview process is usually some sort of 30 to 45-minute presentation of your data. So that would be something, you know, if they still do some of the rounds and such at Purdue, like that would be a great practice run is to do it in there.
Awesome. One thing that you said that I want to go a little bit deeper on is you said, oh, that might be a clever idea, but if they're organized, maybe I have more confidence that you're going to get that done. What's the balance there? Good ideas are great. They're good ideas. But if we don't get them done, what good are they? You know? So is it about getting it done more so than having the one brilliant idea, the magic bullet idea?
That is definitely a balance. It's real easy for things to be your idea and then someone else implements it and they get all the the glory, right? So I think there's a good mix of both, right? So not everything that you help execute, at least in industry, doesn't have to be your idea. And pretty much you'll probably be told to execute some things that are not your ideas. But at the same time, I don't think that should make you quiet. You know, there's kind of this whole movement this is more in the diversity, equity, and inclusion of being able to speak at the table. You know, everybody's sitting at the same conference table, you know, metaphorically or not. And that, you know, if you have some wild idea, you should be comfortable enough to state that. And so that's kind of a more, you know, larger scale movement that we're going towards, but I know it's something that can only be beneficial because people come with different perspectives and different ideas, be that scientifically or their life experience that would help guide them to make those suggestions. And I do think if you're going to state something pretty wild, you might need to show them a plan of how you're going to get that done. But, you know, kind of just like the robot, I mean, that was really, it was me saying, you know, this could be really beneficial. Let's just like meet with a few engineers and kind of see if this even makes any sense, you know. And then once we kind of had some buy-in from another department, it was like, okay, let's like make this formal. Let's present this project. And if they poo-poo it because of money or whatever they want, then we can at least say we tried. So I think there's something to be said for a little bit of both.
Yeah, and that's great that you're able to exercise that muscle because as I said, it sounds like you were able to be very creative and use a different side of your brain than the bench side molecular work that you're trained to do. This seemed to be more mechanics, operational, procedural, right? Alle, how does it work with patents? Now you contributed to the invention of this new machine. Does the company say, oh, thank you so much, Alle, this is now Lilly intellectual property, or are you recorded down as an inventor or co-inventor of the new technology?
Yeah, so you are recorded as a co-inventor on the patent filing. I personally, since I don't know if this machine will go for that or not. I don't know, we'll see. But even certain assays that might be developed. I had the lady that worked next to me at the bench. They went for patent application and she was on the patent, so she had to go through all the lawyer discussions and all that. Yeah. But her name's in there. So that is an option. I will say it's probably less less flexible than you would be in academia, right? So at the end of the day, now I haven't like dug into my work contract and the nitty gritty, but I'm pretty sure if you were to go to court, somehow they'd find a way where at the end of the day, the company ultimately owns it, right? So I do know like part of my clause is if I go work for a competitor, I can't take any of my intellectual property that I established while I was at Lilly and then take it and be like, guess what I did, you know? Now, if that's public in like a patent filing, then it's free game. Yeah, you can go and take that with you. But it would have to be through that, you know, legalese, if you will.
Sure.
So yeah, that would be something to keep in mind. If that patenting is extremely important to you, I would want to really read through that contract first.
And does, in terms of confidentiality, you mentioned that, you know, before you go to a conference, if you're going to present or this and that, you're going to vet it through the lawyers. How free do you feel to speak about science? Do you feel constrained at all because of the confidentiality, more so than you did, you know, in academia? Or how has that changed at all in your mind?
Mm-hmm. It's certainly more formal and regimented through industry, right? Like we have, or even to do this discussion, like I had to put it through our like our lawyer attorney, just to make sure I'm not doing anything crazy. Like I'm not representing Lilly as a whole, as a company. I'm representing my journey or whatever.
Yes.
And I would say, you know, that's both a gift and a curse, because on the plus, you know, like somebody's got eyes on it, and we'll make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to hurt your own work. And then there's also the red tape that's very frustrating. But I haven't had anything yet where it's been like outright denied. A lot of times by the time you're going to a conference to present, that data has already been approved to be published, or it's in the process for that. I will say, as like a discovery bench scientist, a lot of times you may go more as an observer, at least initially, to kind of like gather what other people are doing, rather than presenting yourself. And that portion doesn't require legal okaying. So if you're just an attendee, you know, I've gone to 3 or 4 conferences just to learn like what is the latest and greatest out there, and maybe we can bring them in or something. So yeah, that can be a little bit frustrating, but it's also been really, that's been a surprise. I think that we even published it all and stuff. I really had this idea that this stigma was that, well, my publishing's done now that I've, you know, graduated, and then I'm probably never going to publish again. And I've had actually several papers come out, not as first author, when I was working in the oncology lab over some peds work that we did, and recently found out actually this past weekend that current drug is part of a clinical trial over at Sloan Kettering. We sold it to them for a couple kids. So that was really rewarding to find out, like, oh my gosh, I contributed to some of that work. Like, that is just so cool. Like,
that's awesome. Congratulations, because
yeah.
It does sound like really good stuff that we don't always get to do, right? Or feel the impact of our work so closely as you have. In terms of publications, again, I'm sure that you guys have a process. Maybe it's a little bit more convoluted than it is at the university.
Yes.
But are you encouraged to publish, or is that just really up to you and your group and how things are going and what you guys are doing? Like, I'm sure this new robot necessarily won't be or will be published, or will be sold, or you know, how does that go? Like, how do you, are you encouraged at all?
Yeah, it's a mix. So I think this is kind of the blessing, I guess, of industry, is that if that is something that you really like to do, then your boss will help you find opportunities for that. And if it's something you hate to do, then you can probably bury your head and not have to do it if you don't want to. You know, I personally am not a great writer. And so I would have much rather have done the supplemental work of like generating all that data and then going through and doing all the editing, which is exactly what I made our postdoc do. So Especially if you do a postdoc, the understanding is that you're coming not only to like help contribute to the company, but you're there to get your career ready. Like you need to come in here and publish because that's good for you. So if you're coming in as a postdoc, that's definitely a big push. You will be encouraged to publish. You're supposed to publish, and the kind of data that you publish will be dependent mostly on kind of where is the molecule at. You're never gonna publish any structures that haven't already been published by like the corporate or whatever. But that is something that's always an option. And then I'm trying to remember if there was another part of your question, but it is certainly more convoluted than industry. I will say that. You'll write up, your paper just like you normally would with your manuscript and all your data, and then you'll submit it through an internal system where they'll go, yeah, that's too revealing, or whatever it is. And then you'll go through the normal process of, going to the journal, and then that third editor always comes back and says they hate your chart, and it is a process, but I can pull up a few manuscripts too if you want, and I can send them to you as some examples of some recent publications we've had, and people could take a look at kind of what kind of data comes out, and is that interesting, or does it seem muted to you? I would say it's not very muted, but that's me.
Please do send us either links to those publications, or send me the pub if you want,
Sure.
or the pubs. I will link them in with your YouTube video. We are recording this so that we can put this on YouTube and have others watch this interview if they weren't able to join us at 3:30 or later, because I think I hit the record button a little bit late. Please don't hate me for that. I want to open it up to anybody in the audience who may have questions. I know we have quite a few people online, and I did want to give everybody an opportunity to ask some questions. And if you don't, I do have a couple more to get to ask, if you don't mind. But yeah, are there any questions? And you can go ahead and either unmute yourself, or you can put it on the chat box, and we can go that way. Alle, the master's degree that you did, it was really up to you what you did. I know Dr. Teagarden was there to guide you and advise you, but it was really your degree. It was your project. It was your master's thesis, for lack of a better term. Did you feel that type of ownership with these projects, that sometimes I got a sense when you were talking that sometimes you feel like the rug is pulled under you, and you're like, I was just getting going, and you decide we're going to take a 6-month break, we're going to start working on something else. No, I hope nobody did that to you. If not, we're going to need to talk to Dorothy, but I hope that nobody did that to you during your master's, and I'm sure they didn't. In fact, everybody protected your space in that master's project, I'm fairly certain, because that's how it works in academia. How does it work in industry?
Great question. I would say both. So it is just a fact that sometimes the rug is pulled out from under you, and that's kind of the downside, right? But there is also a great level of ownership, and that comes with things like the patent filing. We wouldn't put 45 people on the patent if they didn't actually have ownership in the process of developing that. I can say personally, a lot of times when in the discovery realm, when those new kind of targets come through, it's maybe just be a group of like 5 of you working on that. So it really is you figuring out the data, and you're going over to the protein chemist and you're going, can you tweak this? I need you to, this isn't working in my assay. And it's really, your PI is asking, hey, like, what's the latest on your assay? And, what do you think? And is it working? And what's the biology say to you? So there's certainly a level of ownership because you're driving that project and its decision. If it gets larger and it gets more resources, that's when they're going to, maybe be like, okay, we need to evaluate how good this really is. And if it's not a go, then it may not be a go. And that is one of the frustrating sides. Yes. Yeah. I see a question in the chat from my friend Teresa there.
Yes. Teresa, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or if you want, we can ask, what are the non-technical traits to highlight during your interview process and on your CV?
Great question as well. I mentioned this previously, but I'll emphasize it again because it's important. Project management skills, being able to say I'm not a one-trick pony. When you're interviewing with lab-based people, they might understand what you're saying when you're talking about, oh, we did this and that, and they can understand there's lots of instruments and plates running. But if you're interviewing with somebody who maybe doesn't have that exact background, you really need to tell them, like, hey, yeah, I'm writing a manuscript and I'm running all these plates and I'm harvesting mouse kidneys, and like say it though in a way that makes sense to them, right? Like something like, coordinated, 12-hour shifts or, assays or whatever, in conjunction with publishing and, overseeing team of 5 or contributing to team of 5. That's just your lab group, and like funneling it in a way that's like, yeah, you were part of a team. It required you to deliver on goals. You already do that. So sell yourself in that process. Another thing I would say, highlighting on your CV, especially like for me, since I had a degree that a lot of people didn't totally understand what biochemical and molecular nutrition meant. They just thought I told people what to eat. I was like, not quite. I actually did a small section of like kind of highlighted courses that I completed. So like, I did an endocrinology course. We did a bunch of stats courses, the advanced presentation skills. And I just highlighted a few of those that might indicate a little bit more of what some of my areas of expertise are. Saying I have a biochem degree and then highlighting a biochem course, I think that's inferred, but kind of pull out some of those things that somebody might not understand and they go, oh, wait, you did a lot of data analysis? Like, okay, that's interesting. I want to ask you about that. So that would be kind of my two top tips. Teresa, does that answer your question?
Yes, that was perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, there's so much that we can put in that CV to get to the interview. Once they start meeting you, once you start talking to them, you should be able to, convince them that you're at least the right person for the job if you have the right character, the right qualities, right? Warda Saeed says, hi, Ali. It was great hearing about your journey. We have worked in trenches together a time or two. I'm only 2 years into my journey at Lilly. Hearing about it all from you was awesome experience. I have to jump on a call. Great talk. So,
yes, Warda is one of my data managers on the team, so she's great.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you have even colleagues that have logged in here and supported you in your interview, your really hard interview with me. I hope it wasn't so bad. It was really great getting to catch up with you and learn a little bit about how your journey's gone so far. Any lasting words of advice that you would want to give us here before we wrap up this Pathfinder program?
Sure. I would say some of the hardest transition was moving out of grad school into my first job, be that academic, industry, small biotech, and to give yourself a little grace on that. If you don't get the first several interviews, if you never hear back from the recruiter, it's not just you, it's hard out there to get a way in, and you might need to get creative. One thing I didn't note is that my very first job at that biotech company, I wasn't getting a response, and so I just faxed them my CV, and that's what got them to respond. They're like, no one's ever used our fax number before. So you just never know what it might take, and it may not be you at all. So give yourself some grace. And if you want to take the jump into industry, you know what, try it in the postdoc, try it for a few years. If you hate it, you can leave. It's okay. And if you don't want to try it, then stay in academia. Nobody's going to hate you for it. There's a lot less bad blood from this side, I can tell you that much.
I love that. I
Yeah.
really like that, Ali. So true. There is no wrong decision, is there? Have you made a wrong decision yet? So has anybody here made a wrong decision yet so far? No. If you don't like it, you can always move, try something else. Life is too short to be hung up on something. If it's not right for you, you don't feel right. I like that a lot. And it again, it's about having enough courage, confidence in yourself and your abilities, and saying, I'll be okay no matter what. Ali, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again. Please stay tuned for further Pathfinder videos. I believe next week we have Jared Patch from Elanco Animal Sciences. I think they're just Elanco now. But please join us again. I think we're talking to him next Wednesday at 3:30, if I'm not mistaken. But look out for the emails. Thank you, Ali. All the best. Wishing you much success
Thank you.
on your adventures, and stay in touch. We're happy to continue talking to you as you move through your journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tommy. It's great to see you again. Teresa, good to see you too. And everyone on the call, feel free to find me on LinkedIn if you have some additional questions about what it's like to make the jump.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All the best.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.